Hi, everybody. This is Allison from Alley Cat Creations. How are you? Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you have yet to do so. And if you get anything from my work, a connect a dot, an epiphany, a mind explosion, a new book to read, a new author to explore, please consider supporting my work. All the links are at the bottom of this video. And if you would be so kind to check out my portfolio at alleycatcreations211.com. That's where you can see all the artwork that I make. Pyramids, skulls, business card holders, candles, all that fun stuff is there. So if you're interested in anything that I do, please email me and I'll be more than happy to answer your email. And if you're interested in purchasing something, do the same because I do everything privately. Channel members, I give channel memberships. Uh, let's just say free entries into raffles. Coming up in the next couple of months, I'm going to be starting doing some oracle card readings and things of that nature. Just getting back into the swing of work again and finding another job still. So things are very complicated in the said life, and hopefully things will get better. But in the meantime, the channel membership at 3D helps me keep going, keep the lights and the bills paid, and it's really inexpensive. That's my coffee right there. I need that soul-sucking deliciousness. So if you're interested, that would help out greatly. I'm still dealing with this below zero. Everything is like forced air. My nose is like dying. So don't mind me. We're going to read today the Secret Doctrine, Stanza 9, The Final Evolution of Man. This shall be very interesting. Not sure how long this is, so it might be a two-parter. We'll see. The Law of One I am still working on. I just want to I like to read that and then give you the points that I can actually touch upon and bring more clarity to. Um, so yeah, just wanted to put that out there. My gratitude and thanks to everybody who does support me, shares, likes, and subscribes. I thank you. I appreciate you. And let's get to it. The creators repent. They atone for their neglect. Man become endowed with minds. The fourth race develops perfect speech. Every androgynous unit is separated and becomes bisexual. Seeing which, the sin committed with the animals, the Lahas, the spirits, the son of wisdom, who had not built man, who had refused to create, wept, saying, sorry, guys, hang on. The Amansa, the mindless, have defiled our future abodes. This is karma. Let us dwell in the others. Let us teach them better, lest worse should happen. They did. Then all became endowed with manas, minds. They saw the sin of the mindless. But they had already separated before the ray of divine reason had enlightened the dark region of their hereto slumbering minds and had sinned. That is to say, they had committed evil unconsciously by producing an effect which was unnatural. Yet, like the other six primitive brother or fellow races, even so, the seventh, henceforth, degenerated race, which will have to abide its time for its final development on account of the sin committed, even the race will find itself on the last day on one of the seventh paths. For the wise guard the home of nature's order. They assume excellent forms in secret. But we must see whether the animals tampered with were of the same kind as those known to zoology. The fall occurred according to the testimony of ancient wisdom and the old records. As soon as Daksha, the reincarnated creator of man and things in the early third race, disappeared to make room for the portion of mankind which had separated. This is how the commentary explains the details that preceded the fall. In the initial period of man's fourth evolution, the human kingdom branched off in several and various directions. The outward shape of its first specimens was not uniform, for the vehicles, the egg-like external shells, in which the future fully physical man gestated, were often tampered with before they hardened by huge animals. Of species now unknown and which belong to the tentative efforts of nature, the result was that intermediate races of monsters, half animals, half men, were produced. But as they were failures, they were not allowed to breathe long and live, though the intrinsically, there we go, paramount power of psychic over physical nature being yet very weak and hardly established, the egg-born sons have taken several of their females unto themselves as mates and bred other human monsters. Later, animal species and human races became gradually equilibrized. They separated and mated no longer. Man created no more, he beget, but he also beget animals as well as man in days of old. Therefore, the sages or wise men who speak of males who had no more will begotten offspring, but begot various animals along with the giants on females of other species animals, being as, or in the manner of, sons, punitive to them, and they, the human males, refusing in time to be regarded as punitive fathers of dumb creatures, spoke truthfully and wisely. Upon seeing this state of things, the kings and lords of the last races of the third and fourth placed the seal of prohibition upon the sinful intercourse. Sorry, everything is in italics, so it's hard for me to see. It interfered with karma. It developed new karma. They, the divine kings, struck the culprits with sterility. They destroyed the red and the blue races. In another, we find there were blue and red-faced animal men, even in later times, not from actual intercourse between the human and animal species, but by descent. And another still passage mentions red-haired, swarthy men going on all fours who bend and unbend, stand erect and fall on their hands again, who speak as their forefathers and run on their hands as their giant foremothers. Perchance in these specimens, Heclians might recognize not the Homo primigenus, but some of the lower tribes, such as some tribes of the Australian savages. Nevertheless, even these are not descended from the anthropod apes, but from human fathers and semi-human mothers. Or to speak more correctly, from human monsters, those failures mentioned in the first commentary. The real anthropods, Haeckel's, I don't know how to pronounce any of those words because they're not in English, came far later in the closing time of Atlantis. The orangutan, the gorilla, the chimpanzee, the cynocephalus are the last and purely physical evolutions from lower anthropod mammalians. They have a spark of purely human essence in them. Man, on the other hand, has not one drop of Pythiad blood in his veins. Thus said old wisdom and universal tradition. How is the separation of sexes affected? It is asked. Are we to believe in the old Jewish fable of the rib of Adam yielding Eve? Even such belief is more logical and reasonable than the descent of man from the quadrumana, without any reservation, as the former hides an esoteric truth under a fabulous version, while the later conceals no deeper fact than a desire to force upon mankind a materialistic fiction. The rib is bone, and when we read in Genesis that Eve was made out of the rib, it only means that the race with bones was produced out of the previous race and races, which were boneless. This is an esoteric tenet spread far and wide, as it is almost universal under its various forms. Tahitian tradition states that man was created out of Aria, red earth. Tara, the creative power, the chief god, put man to sleep for long years, for several lives, which means racial periods, and is a reference to his mental sleep, as shown elsewhere. During that time, the deity pulled on ivy bone out of man, and she became a woman. Nevertheless, whatever the allegory may mean, even its exoteric meaning necessitates a divine builder of man, a progenitor. Do we then believe in such supernatural beings? We say no. Occultism has never believed in anything, whether inanimate or animate, outside nature, nor are we cosmolators or polytheists for believing in heavenly man and divine man, for we have the accumulated testimony of the ages with its unvarying evidence on every essential point to support us in this. The wisdom of the ancients and universal tradition. We reject, however, every groundless and baseless tradition, which, having outgrown strategic allegory and symbolism, had found acceptance in exoteric creeds. But that which is preserved in unanimous traditions, only the willfully blind could reject. Hence, we believe in races of beings other than our own in far remote geological periods, in races of ethereal, following incorporeal, arupa, men with form but no solid substance, giants who preceded us pygmies, in dynasties of divine beings, those kings and instructors of the third race in arts and sciences, compared with our little modern science, stands less chance than elementary arithmetic with geometry. No, certainly not. We do not believe in the supernatural, but only in the superhuman, or rather interhuman intelligences. One may easily appreciate the feeling of reluctance that an educated person would have to being classed with the superstitious and ignorant, and even realize the great truth uttered by Renan when he says that the supernatural has become like the original sin, a blemish that everyone seems ashamed of, even those most religious persons who refuse in our day to accept even a minimum of Bible miracles in all their crudeness, and who seek to reduce them to the minimum, hide and conceal it in the foremost corners of the past. But the supernatural of Renan belongs to dogma in its dead letter. It has not to do with its spirit, nor with the reality of facts in nature. If theology asks us to believe that the 4,000 or 5,000 years ago men lived 900 years more, and that a portion of mankind, the enemies of the people of Israel exclusively, was composed of giants and monsters, we decline to believe that such a thing existed in nature 5,000 years back. For nature never proceeds by jumps and starts, and logic and common sense, besides geology, anthropology, and ethnology, have just rebelled against such assertions. But if that same theology, giving up her fantastic chronology, had claimed that men lived 969 years, the age of Methuselah, 5 million years ago, we would have nothing to say against the claim. For in those days, the physical frame of men was compared to the present human body, as that of Megalosaurus to a common lizard. A naturalist suggests another difficulty. The human is the only species which, however unequal in its races, can breed together. There is no question of selection between human races, says the anti-Darwinist, and no evolutionist can deny the argument, one which very triumphantly proves specific unity. How then can occultism insist that a portion of the fourth race, humanity, begot young ones from females of another only semi-human, if not quite an animal race, the hybrids resulting from which union not only bred freely, but produced the ancestors of modern anthropod apes? Esoteric science replies to this that it was in very beginnings of physical man. Since then, nature has changed her ways, and sterility is the only result of the crime of man's bestiality. But we have to say, this day proves of this. The Secret Doctrine teaches that the specific unity of mankind is not without exceptions even now. For there are, or rather still were, a few years ago, descendants of these half-animal tribes or races, both of remote Lemurian and Lemuro-Atlantean origin. The world knows them as Tasmanians, now extinct. Australians, Andaman Islanders, the descent of the Tasmanians can be almost proved by a fact that struck Darwin a good deal without his being able to make anything of it. This fact deserves a note. Now, Quatrefages, I don't know how to say his name, and other naturalists who seek to prove monogenesis by the very fact of every race of mankind being capable of crossing with every other, have left out of their calculations exceptions which do not in this case confirm the rule. Human crossings may have been a general rule from the time of the separation of the sexes, and yet that other law may assert itself. Sterility between two human races, just as between two animal species of various kinds, in those rare cases when a European condescending to see in a female a savage tribe, a mate, happens to choose a member of such mixed tribes. Darwin notes a case in Tasmanian tribe whose women were suddenly struck with the sterility in mass sometime after the arrival among them of the European colonists. The great naturalist tried to explain this fact by change of diet, food, conditions, etc., but finally given up the solution of the mystery. For the occultists, it is a very evident one. Crossing, as it is called, of Europeans with Tasmanian women, the representatives of a race whose progenitors were a soulless and mindless monster and a real human, though still a mindless a man, brought on sterility. This, not alone as a consequence of a physiological law, but as a decree of karmic evolution in the question of further survival of the abnormal race. In no one point of the above is science prepared to believe as yet, but it will have to do in the long run. Esoteric philosophy, let us remember, only fills the gaps made by science and corrects her false premises. Yet in this particular geology and even botany and zoology support the esoteric teachings. It has been suggested by many geologists that the Australian natives coexisting, as he does, with the archaic fauna and flora must date back to an enormous antiquity. The whole environment of the mysterious race about whose origin ethnology is silent is a testimony to the truth of the esoteric position. It is a very curious fact, says Jukes, that not only these marsupial animals, the mammals found in the Oxfordshire Stonefield slates, but several of the shells, as for instance, the Trigonius, and even some of the plants found fossils in the Oolitic rocks, much more nearly resemble those now living in Australia than the living forms of any other part of the globe. This might be explained on the supposition that since the Oolitic Jurassic period, less change has taken place in Australia than elsewhere, and that the Australian flora and fauna consequently retain something of the Oolic type, while it had been altogether supplanted and replaced as now the rest of the globe. Interesting facts there. Maybe facts. Who knows? Why now has less change taken place in Australia than elsewhere? Where is the reason deity for such a curse of retardation? I'm sorry, I don't like that language. It is simply because the nature of the environment develops pari passu with the race concerned. Correspondences rule in every quarter. The survivors of those later Lemurians who escaped the destruction of their fellows when the main continent was submerged became the ancestors of a portion of the present native tribes. Being a very low sub-race, begotten originally of animals of monsters, whose very fossils are now resting miles under the sea floor, their stock has existed in an environment strongly subjected to the law of retardation. I don't believe that. Although, who knows? Australia is one of the oldest lands now above the waters, and the senile decrepitude of the old age, its virgin soil notwithstanding, it can produce no few forms unless helped by new and fresh races and artificial cultivation and breeding. To return, however, once more to the history of the third race, the sweat-born, the egg-bearing, and the androgyny, almost sexless in its early beginnings, it became bisexual or androgynous very gradually, of course. The passage from the former to the latter transformation required numberless generations during which the simple cell that issued from the earliest parent, the two-in-one, first developed into a bisexual being, and then the cell, becoming a regular egg, gave forth a unisexual creature. The third race, mankind, is the most mysterious of all the hereto developed five races. The mystery of the how of the generation of the distinct sexes must, of course, be very obscure here, as it is the business of an embryologist and a specialist, the present work giving only faint outlines of the process. But it is evident that the units of the third race, humanity, began to separate in their prenatal shells or eggs, and to issue out of them a distinct male and female babes ages after the appearance of its early progenitors. And as time rolled on its geological periods, the newly born subraces began to lose their natal capacities. Toward the end of the fourth subrace, the babe lost its faculty of walking as soon as liberated from its shell, and by the end of the fifth, mankind was born under the same conditions and by the same identical process as our historical generations. This required, of course, millions of years of the reader has made acquainted with the approximate figures, at least of the exoteric calculations in stanza 2. We are approaching the turning point of the evolution of races. Let us see what the occult philosophy says of the origin of language. The fourth race developed speech. The commentaries explain that the first race, the etherical or astral sons of yoga, also called self-born, was in our sense speechless, as it was devoid of mind on our plane. The second race had a sound language, to wit, chant-like sounds composed of vowels alone. The third race developed in the beginning a kind of language, which was only a slight improvement of the various sounds in nature, on the cry of gigantic insects and the first animals, which, however, were hardly nascent in the day of the sweat-born, the early third race. In its second half, when the sweat-born gave birth to the egg-born, the middle third race, and when these, instead of hatching out, made the reader pardon the rather ridiculous expression when applied to human beings in our age, as androgynous beings, began to evolve into separate males and females, and when the same law of evolution led them to reproduce their kind sexually, an act which forced the creative gods, compelled by karmic law, to incarnate in mindless men, then only was speech developed. But even then, it was still no better than a tentative effort. The whole human race was at the time of one language and one lip. This did not prevent the last two subraces of the third race from building cities and sowing far and wide the first seeds of civilization under the guidance of their divine instructors and their own already awakened minds. Let the reader also bear in mind that as each of the seven races is divided into four ages, the golden, silver, bronze, and iron age, so is every smallest division of such races. Speech then developed according to the occult teachings in the following order: monosyllabic, syllables speech, that of the first approximately full developed human beings at the close of the third root race, the golden colored yellow complexioned men, after their separation into the sexes and the full awakening of their minds. Before that, they communicated through what would now be called thought transference, though with the exception of the race called the Sons of Will and Yoga, the first in whom the Sons of Wisdom had incarnated. Thought was but very little developed in nascent physical man and never soared above a low terrestrial level. Their physical bodies belonged to the earth, and their monads remained on the highest plane altogether. Language could not be well developed before the full acquisition and development of their reasoning faculties. The monosyllabic speech was vowel parent, so to speak. The monosyllabic languages mixed with hard consonants still in use amongst the yellow races, which are known as anthropologists. Sorry, I am messing up names and stuff. These linguistic characteristics developed in the agglutinative languages. The later were spoken by some Atlantean races, while other parent stocks of the fourth race preserved the mother language. And as languages have their cyclic evolution, their childhood, purity, growth, fall into matter, a mixture with other languages, maturity, decay, finally death. So the primitive speech of the most civilized Atlantean races, that language, which is referred to as Rakashi Bahasa, something like that, in old Sanskrit works, decayed and almost died out. While the cream of the fourth race gravitated more and more toward the apex physical and intellectual evolution, thus leaving as an heirloom to the nascent fifth, the Aryan race, the inflectional, highly developed languages, the agglutinative decay and remained at, I'm fucking that word up, so sorry, as a fragmentary fossil idiom, scattered now and nearly limited to the Aboriginal tribes of America. The inflectional speech, the root of the Sanskrit, very erroneously called the elder sister of the Greek instead of its mother, was the first language, now the mystery tongue of the initiates of the fifth race. At any rate, the Semitic languages are the bastard descendants of the first phonic corruptions of the eldest children of the early Sanskrit. The occult doctrine admits of no such divisions as the Aryan and the Semite, excepting even the Turanian, with the ample reservations. The Semites, especially the Arabs, are later Aryans, degenerated in spirituality and perfected in materiality. To these belongs all the Jews and the Arabs. The former are a tribe descended from the Chaldeans, I don't know how to pronounce that, of India, the outcasts, many of them ex-Brahmins, who sought refuge in Chaldea in Sidon and Iran, and were truly born from the father Abram, not Brahman. Some 8,000 years BC, the later the Arabs are the descendants of those Aryans who would not go into India at the time of the dispersion of nations, some of whom remained on the borderlands thereof in Afghanistan and Kabul, and among the Oxus, while others penetrated into and invaded Arabia. But this was when Africa had already been raised as a continent. We have, meanwhile, to follow as closely as limited space will permit the gradual evolution of now truly human species. It is the sudden arrest evolution of certain sub-races and their forced and violent diversions into the purely animal line by artificial crossbreeding, truly analogous to the hybridization which we have now learned to utilize in the vegetable and animal kingdoms, that we have to look for the origin of anthropods. And these red-haired and hair-covered monsters, the fruit of the unnatural connection between men and animals, the lords of wisdom did not incarnate as we see. Thus, by a long series of transformations due to unnatural crossbreedings, unnatural sex selection, originated in due course of time the lowest specimens of humanity, While further bestiality and the fruit of their first animal efforts of reproduction begot a species which developed into mammalian apes ages later. As to the separation of sexes, it did not occur suddenly, as one may think. Natural process proceeds slowly in whatever she does. Interesting. I'm going to leave it here because this section is humongous and the next session is amazing. I'll give you a little sneak peek. It's going into Eden, serpents, and dragons. Yay. But it's a very rather lengthy section, and I don't want to have to section part it off or leave it halfway in the middle of something. So I'm going to leave it here. So I want to thank each and every one of you, sending each of you love, like a passion, grace, shielding, and protective energy. Please go within. Be the shoulder. Be the biggest, brightest lighthouse you can be. Seed your truths. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hopefully this is all going to clear up and I'm not going to cough and sound all murky. And I thank you all for your gratitude, your abundance, and just your Amish mindset. And I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye for now.